Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Roe v. Wade is ending. What does this mean for Maryland and the country? Why are opioid deaths continuing to increase in Maryland? And the County Council approves preliminary master plan for Silver Spring. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member Nancy Floreen and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Alarm bells first sounded during the oral arguments held at the Supreme Court last December in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization. In that case, which challenged the state law that banned most abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy, Justice Kavanaugh suggested that why should the Supreme Court be the arbiter rather than Congress or the state legislatures? In other words, why should the Supreme Court decide the matter of abortion? Now, 5 months later, after someone from the Supreme Court leaked Justice Alito's draft opinion in Dobbs, it indicated that a 5-4 majority of the Supreme Court seems poised to strike down the 1973 decision in Roe v. Wade, which found that a woman's right to an abortion was protected by a number of articles of the United States Constitution. If Justice Alito's opinion holds, it would strike down Roe v. Wade through an analysis that concludes that abortion is not and has never been a right in the Constitution, and it will return the process to the states. Nancy, there are a lot of layers to unpack here, not only about the decision, but about the impact on the nation and our state. But, I guess the global question is, what is the impact that the decision will have on women?
Well, obviously, what has happened already in these states that have enacted these restrictions is that, women are the ones, particularly people of poverty, people with less access to means to travel. They're the ones who are going to be most affected by this. Is it going to encourage mail order abortion, which is what is occurring now and is available now? Maybe. There's a lot of interstate travel going on. But I want to make one thing clear. Nobody thinks that abortion is a great idea. Nobody's going, Ray, yay, I can have an abortion. Nobody wants to have an abortion. But sometimes it's necessitated by a woman's situation. And I think, that's something to keep in the background as we're talking about. It's a terrible thing to have to go through. And now these women are going to be forced to go through different machinations now to address their situation. Abortions are not going to end. Yeah, this brings me back to when I was in college when Roe v. Wade was enacted, was issued. Everybody knew somebody who'd gone to a back alley abortionist, gone to another state, gone to another country. That's going to continue, and it's going to create an unhealthy environment for women across the country. If states are permitted to set the rules, Maryland will be, a welcoming place for that. But it's no way for people to live, and it's a terrible decision, and it has grave implications, of course, for every other decision that the court has ever issued that is not supported by clear language in the Constitution.
Well,
that's what we're going to get into here.
We'll get to that in a minute. But once again, this demonstrates the tug of war between federalism, between states' rights and federalism and the Constitution. So, Mark, how does this sort of play out in the initial political landscape that we're seeing?
I think there's an important other dimension to this, which is that there's policy questions, political questions, and then there are judicial questions. And so while you can make the argument for on a policy side, which obviously Maryland legislators have adopted, what the court is faced with is determining whether or not abortion is required as a matter of law, given the language of the Constitution. Now, Roe v. Wade, when it originally was decided, came down on the side that there was a right of privacy that was implied, but not expressed, not implicit in the court. in the Constitution, and that's where Roe v. Wade, and that has been for nearly 50 years now, has been a subject of considerable controversy. One way to think about it is constitutional rights are very specific. They're rights that prohibit the government from doing something, as opposed to the sort of notional policy rights, the right to food, right to shelter that we sometimes talk about. And Nancy put her finger on a kind of a key point, which is that in many states, most states actually, abortion will continue to be available. There's no suggestion that the court will eliminate abortion. It will simply allow it to go back to the states. And on that question, there are kind of a variety of outcomes. Arguably, in Maryland, if it went back to the state, Maryland would have a more, how shall I say, generous abortion law than a federal law, if that were to come forward. So I think the important point is that this is not as much a policy question about abortion per se, since it will undoubtedly continue, as it is recognition that this isn't an issue that really the court should decide. It's one that should be left to legislators and to decide for themselves.
Well, let's follow that track just a little bit, Nancy, because as Mark indicated, here in Maryland, the Maryland legislature acted very quickly, given the pace of legislatures after Roe v. Wade, and Governor Schaefer actually in 1991 signed into law a right to abortion up to the moment of viability, and of course, viability is still a term that is subject to some debate, and we did have a constitutional, I guess, definition here in Maryland. So we're not going to see a great impact here in Maryland, and in fact, in our last legislature, some of availability for having reproductive health decisions were expanded. So could you comment on that?
Well, those additional resources, of course, that was vetoed by Mr. Hogan. It was adopted by the legislature. Now he's declined to fund it, or at least reduce funding significantly. Now, that's another conversation about his political objectives, I think. But the fact remains that Maryland is going to be a welcoming place, but the people voted. I mean, there was a referendum on this. This is not a purely political decision made in a legislature in a dark room or by a court. This is a referendum voted on by the people of Maryland. So this is a secure right and situation that, I don't think there's an issue in Maryland with respect to access to abortion. I think the real issue is how it's going to play out in the next election. I think that's going to be relevant because Democrats are going to come out to vote.
Well, that's I think the political considerations are something we're going to have to look at.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, if for most people up until the leak of this decision, abortion was not in the top 5 of their reasons for wanting to go to the polls. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Mark, earlier, Nancy talked about the suggestion, and other pundits have come out with this line of argument that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that there are other rights that are in jeopardy that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. And is that a real threat, or is that just a perceived threat?
I think that's a perceived threat. If you look at sort of the significant case law on sort of racial equity, on voter, I mean, there is very firm basis in Constitution. Basically, the 14th Amendment. I mean, we go down the various amendments to the Constitution where many of these rights come from. So I'm not sure that that's really a strong case, and I'm not thinking of a particular right that has been as controversial. I mean, we talked about, yes, I appreciate the sentiment here in Maryland. This has been a very polarizing issue for now 50 years, for basically closing on 2 generations, arguably. And it is fascinating when you look at the polling data, how you ask this question ends up creating kind of a range of responses. It's very important, yes, that if you do ask the basic question, do you support a right to choose, you will get a majority. I think that, it's really just a statement of fact. When you parse it out with, do you support late term abort, do you support sort of, various kinds of restrictions, you do get different responses. And again, how you phrase that. But I do think, again, if it's a political question, an issue of political will, there is majority sentiment for a right to abortion. The issue is kind of how it would be structured if there were limitations, restrictions.
Well, I want to follow up on your observation and go to Nancy on this. The American Bar Association released a statement on this and saying that and quoting from law professor Lawrence Tribe, that there are possibly other rights that may come under scrutiny as a result of Roe, and in particular, gay marriage. That for a long period of time, that too was treated as a state's issue until Justice Kennedy wrote his opinion a few years ago, saying that there was a right to gay marriage on the national level. And I think that's what is striking. So Nancy, you want to comment on that?
I would push back on that in that particular case. There was a 14th Amendment claim based on marriage, recognition of marriage being a government it takes the government. If it was just individuals by themselves, it would be a separate issue. So
let me ask you on this.
Yeah.
Well, I do think it's a slippery slope. And if you look at the draft opinion, Alito dances around it, said, oh, no, this is not like those things. So he did make an effort to distinguish the abortion issue from other kinds of cases. But I got to say, creative litigators are going to pursue this now. They really opened the door so much for stare decisis. That is the issue. And that's the legal issue that is going to raise for many people. How much of the Supreme Court decisions can we count on going going from this court? It's a really big deal. I'm an attorney.
The court's not infallible. Let's face it, the court is not infallible. I mean, the Dred Scott decision is, the perfect example that is always cited about the fallibility of the court.
Well, that's the easy one.
There are limits to stare decisis, so I don't want to get caught up in those weeds. The last question, and I think this is one that as the protests have played out since the leak, how should we view the leaker and what that person did, he or she did, in releasing this? Are they a hero or are they a villain? I'll let you both comment, and then we have to go to break.
Well, I'll say my husband was a Supreme Court law clerk, and he is appalled. We in this household are appalled that this could occur, but there's precedent for it, and it was leaked before, as the pundits say, in Roe versus Wade. So it's happened before. The world isn't going to come to an end, but to make it so clear that the court understands the political nature of the situation and is playing to someone's hands, that I think is upsetting and unfortunate.
Mark, you have 30 seconds.
Again, I think the challenge is looking to the Supreme Court to be a kind of super legislature, as opposed to allowing what are predominantly political questions to be resolved either at Congress or in state legislatures. And it reflects how we've projected in the Supreme Court this notion that these, again, political questions, policy questions that divide us are going to be resolved by the Supreme Court.
Well, we're getting the sign. I want to thank you both for a very thoughtful discussion of an enormously important issue. When we come back from this short break, why are opioid deaths continuing to rise here in Maryland? Stay tuned. And welcome back. 8 years ago, while campaigning for governor, then candidate Larry Hogan talked about the awful scourge of opioid addiction. Mark, there were 1,900 opioid and fentanyl-related deaths in this past year, an increase of 2% from 2020. What is causing this endless cycle of addiction that's all around us, and we know it, and we acknowledge is all around us? How do we do? What's happening here?
And let me to acknowledge too that so many families and communities of friends have been touched by this. It really is a wrenching, it is an epidemic. And one of the lessons I think one of the things we're going to learn about COVID as the data comes out is that the isolation and challenges of COVID really exacerbated sort of diseases of desperation as a result of isolation. And I suspect that this public health data, as we kind of tease it out over the next couple of years, will reflect that was a significant, not COVID deaths, but a contributor to kind of this public health catastrophe that we've experienced for the last 2 years.
Yeah, so Nancy, this is a tough question. I mean, more people are dying from drug overdoses than were victims of homicides the past 2 years. And as Mark suggests, is there an answer to this?
I think it's a statement of people who are hopeless, who have no hope, people who are isolated. I agree completely with what Mark has said, and the extent of stress in the community. It's also related to poverty, of lack of options, and the choice to go down the wrong path. I mean, a choice has been made at some point, and the opportunity to return from that is pretty limited. I think it's terrible. I think people have been tearing their hair out about this for a good long time, and I'm not sure we're any closer to finding a solution.
Well, this raises, always the difference between enforcement and treatment, but also, I mean, there is the fentanyl, the introduction of fentanyl and easily available fentanyl into the mix that is so troubling. And part of that is suggested is it's coming through our southern border and our lack of enforcement there.
And actually taking that one step further, it's much of it is also coming from China through the southern border, as you said. And one of the challenges is that the flood of fentanyl has driven the cost down dramatically, and that, how shall I say, has removed what might have been a barrier for many people to become addicted.
I saw a demonstration where a former DEA agent took a sugar packet and poured it in his hand and said, "This is enough fentanyl to kill 500 people." I mean, when you get that kind of dangerous drug on the market, it's frightening.
Well, and someone's getting rich off this.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to control that.
Yeah, it's important to kind of acknowledge the treatment options that do exist, and there are therapies that can help in addition to, going through some kind of rehab that can provide some maintenance. And where jurisdictions have had success, it's usually involved with encouraging folks to be able to participate in that and forward.
Well, Mark, I'm going to have to let you have the last word on this, because we're going to talk about a more fun subject, I hope, which is the Silver Spring Master Plan. And Nancy, given your experience on the county council and the county planning board, what do you think about the goals that were established by the county council to encourage, green cover? My script says green core, but it should be cover, and minimizing stormwater runoff and incentivizing new development near transit hubs. Are those all good things?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
they're achievable.
Well, the question is how much is left to develop in Silver Spring. Well, it's not all built out, but a good portion of it has reached its limit. And, they're dealing with what options there may be going into the future. Remember, a master plan is like a 25-year-old long document. So a lot can happen between now and when it gets actually implemented. What's interesting about the plan, it also identifies a lot of things that planning really can't control, like encouraging small businesses and things of that nature that really need the engagement of the county government, which the planning board is not. They're a separate organization. It encourages, I think, 35% green roofs on new construction. incentives for using redeveloping public parking garages. This is stuff they've been doing all along. What's interesting is that they've expanded the scope of the plan a little bit. I used to live right by downtown Silver Spring, and it expanded the borders of their conversation right out to where Cedar Street in that part of Silver Spring. So they're encouraging a little bit more mixed use around the edges. I don't know how I feel about that, but the question is, how likely is that to occur? Probably not much. Maybe have more in-home doctor's offices and things of that nature, which they've always had in Silver Spring. What's interesting is that I have not heard a word about this until I read about it in Bethesda Beat the other day. And I think that's a good sign that it's not going to face any difficulty in getting approved.
Yeah,
Usually the council doesn't approve anything that's hard before primary. I don't think this is going to be so hard that they can't approve it and move forward.
Well, Mark, the one striking line in, I think it was Bethesda Beat analysis was that there was no mention of Thrive Montgomery 2050. In fact, it had been removed from the plan. You've got a minute to comment on it.
Well, I think that in and of itself speak volume, although of course the common denominator to all of that is an increase in density in key areas. That becomes kind of a whole nother conversation, because there are limits to the density that we can achieve in Montgomery County, even in those high density areas, to support public transportation. And I'll stop there, but yes.
Mark, we need more roads, Mark.
Exactly. Well,
we do. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, one of the challenges with public transportation, do a metric of how long does it take you to get up to available jobs, and that's a challenge.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and I think another negative or another effect of the pandemic was people have retreated to their cars as opposed to mass transit, because they want the safety and security of being in their own vehicle. We got to go. Carolyn is flashing the pink sign at me. We got to turn off. So stay tuned for parting shots when we come right back. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Nancy Floreen.
Well, this is not a parting shot. This is a parting thank you. Last weekend, Rebuilding Together Montgomery County hosted over 700 volunteers throughout Montgomery County, working on about 23 different homes owned by Montgomery County homeowners who are low income but need a lot of help to be able to stay in their homes. And these are churches, corporations, businesses, regular people in the community have volunteered with their axes and their hammers and their nails and their saws and their yard tools to make Montgomery County's residents live in a nicer place. And for that, we are all incredibly grateful. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, great work, Nancy. Thank you. And now with parting shot, Mark Uncapher.
So earlier this week, Casey, I had a conversation with Bruce Hoyt, a journalist now with covering Maryland issues, and he reminisced as the founder of 21 this week, some of the early days and the early guests and his co-hosts and what have you. And he reminded us of an important anniversary which just took place, which is that this is the 30th anniversary this year of 21 this week. And so happy birthday to us.
Well, happy birthday to us. And you just made me feel old, Mark. Thank you again. But no, Bruce had a tremendous vision. And Bruce and Blair Lee were the kind of the founders of the program, and they did a wonderful thing, because Montgomery County needs an independent spotlight looking at our political affairs. I want to thank you both for being here today, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.